Save her instead of me. The poor widow pleaded. The lonely vampire stayed silent, and then took her. Its light spilled across the frost-covered village of Arinthia, glimmering off the thatched roofs and empty streets. The winter wind whispered through the bare trees, carrying with it a chill that seemed to seep into bones and hearts alike. In the center of the village, a widow knelt before a shadowed figure whose presence alone drew the warmth from the world. Alara's hands trembled as she clutched the hem of her threadbare shawl. She could barely see the figure in the darkness, yet she knew who it was. The stories had always told of him, Caelric, the vampire lord, older than the oldest oak, whose name was whispered in fear across the kingdom. Some said he had no heart, that he existed only to take what he wanted. Yet here he was, standing silent and still as if he had been waiting for her. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of desperation. "Save her, save my daughter instead of me." The words hung in the air like a fragile crystal, trembling but unbroken. She dared not look up, fearing the cold judgment she expected in his eyes. But when she did, she found him silent, unmoving, and yet impossibly present. His eyes were dark, deep pools that seemed to draw the light away, yet they held a strange intensity, a weight that made her heart ache. Lyra, her daughter, lay curled on a small bed in their humble home, pale and feverish under the curse that no healer could touch. It had begun as a simple illness but had twisted into something unnatural, something old. The village healers shook their heads. "The child is bound by magic," they said. "There is no cure for this in our hands." Alara had tried everything, every prayer, every potion, every whispered plea to the gods. Nothing had worked. In despair, she had come to the forest at the edge of the village, where the shadows grew thick and the wind carried secrets, seeking the one person rumored to hold power over life and death. Caelric's presence seemed to fill the small clearing. The air grew heavier, more silent, as if the world itself held its breath. Alara knelt lower, pressing her hands together in prayer. "Take me instead," she begged again. "I will give myself to you, but spare my daughter, please." For a long moment there was only silence. Then slowly he spoke. His voice was smooth like polished stone, carrying the weight of centuries. "Do you think your life is of value to me?" Alara flinched, expecting cruelty, but there was no malice. Only distance, only a sorrow that seemed to reach back through time. "I do not know," she whispered, "but I cannot bear to lose her, not yet, not like this." His eyes lingered on her face, unreadable, and something like a shadow of emotion passed through them, something faint, almost imperceptible. He turned slightly, as if considering her, and yet he remained silent. The wind carried the sound of distant howls, echoes of creatures that had once roamed the forest freely, now restrained by the night. Alara shivered but did not move. She felt that somehow in this moment she was balanced on the edge of a precipice, between life and something far darker, and only Caelric could decide which way she would fall. "I will take you to my home," he said at last, his voice low and measured. "If you wish me to help her, you must trust me." Alara's heart leapt, yet she nodded silently. She had no choice but to follow him, even into the unknown. The journey was silent except for the crunch of frost beneath their feet. The forest seemed alive, shadows stretching and twisting like long fingers, yet none dared to approach them. Alara stole glances at him as they walked. He moved with the grace of someone who had seen centuries pass, and yet there was a weight to his steps, as though he carried invisible chains. She wondered what loss could have shaped a creature so powerful, so commanding, into one who now walked beside her in quiet restraint. Finally, they arrived at the castle, a towering structure of black stone that seemed to grow from the very earth. Ivy clung to its walls like dark veins, and the windows glimmered with an inner light, cold and silver. Caelric moved to the door and gestured for her to enter. Inside, the castle was a labyrinth of marble halls and shadowed corridors. Candles flickered in sconces, casting dancing light across the ancient walls. The air smelled faintly of cedar and old stone, and a sense of history pressed upon her. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. He led her to a room where Lyra was placed on a bed, still pale but alive. The child's eyes fluttered open as Lyra approached, and she let out a small sigh of relief. Lyra reached for her mother, and Alara took her hand, feeling the warmth of her small fingers in her own. "She is weak," Kaelric said, his eyes studying the child. "The curse is strong. It has not yet consumed her, but it will if left unchecked." Alara felt a shiver run through her. "What must I do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You must let me act," he said simply. "I cannot cure her with words. You must trust me as you have trusted the night to guide you here." Alara swallowed her fear, nodding. She could not understand the depths of what he might do, nor could she imagine the consequences, but she had come too far to turn back. Kaelric knelt beside Lyra, placing a hand lightly on her forehead. The child's eyes widened, not in fear, but as if sensing the presence of something ancient and terrible yet strangely protective. Alara watched, her heart a mix of awe and anxiety. Time seemed to stretch, the moments heavy with a quiet magic that pulsed in the air. Kaelric's hand glowed faintly, a pale silver light that seemed to draw the shadows closer, and Alara felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon them. Finally, he withdrew his hand. Lyra's breathing steadied, her color returning slightly to her cheeks. Alara's relief was immense, yet it was tempered by a new fear, one she could not name. "You have saved her," she said, her voice trembling. "But at what cost?" Kaelric's eyes met hers, and for the first time there was a glimmer of something personal, something human. "The cost is mine," he said softly, "not yours. That you must understand." Alara wanted to ask more, to know the truth behind his words, but the castle seemed to grow colder with each passing moment. Outside, the wind howled through the towers, carrying whispers that sounded like warnings. The night was alive, and it was watching them. She looked at him, at the vampire lord who had held her daughter's life in his hands, and she felt an unfamiliar stir of something dangerous, something like hope, mingled with fear. For a long time, they simply stood there, two figures bound together by fate and fear, by the fragile thread of trust that had been spun in desperation. Alara knew that this night had changed everything. Nothing could ever be the same again, not the village, not her daughter, and certainly not Kaelric himself. And then, as if the night itself were holding its breath, a sound echoed through the halls, a rustle, a whisper, a shadow that moved where it should not. Alara's heart caught in her throat. Kaelric's expression hardened, his centuries-old caution returning. "They are coming," he said quietly, almost to himself. "And soon you will understand why your daughter's life drew me here." Alara clutched Lyra closer, her eyes wide. "Who is coming?" she asked. "The darkness," he said. "The same that has haunted me for hundreds of years, and it will not wait for mercy." A chill passed through the room, and Alara realized that the danger was not over, not by a long measure. The night had only just begun, and the shadows had stories of their own. She glanced at Kaelric, the silent, lonely vampire who had taken her plea to heart, and wondered what secrets lay hidden behind those centuries-old eyes. For the first time, she felt the fragile thrill of hope, and the terrible weight of knowing that the night held both salvation and peril in equal measure. And in the shadows, unseen but felt, the wind seemed to whisper a promise. The story was only beginning, and the true darkness had yet to reveal itself. The castle seemed alive. Shadows twisted along the marble halls like living creatures, and the flickering candlelight cast long, uneven shapes against the walls. Alara held Lyra close as they walked, feeling the cold of the stone floors through her thin slippers. She could hear her own heartbeat, fast and anxious, mingling with the faint hum of wind through the ancient towers. Kaelric walked ahead of them, his presence calm and steady. Every step he took seemed to echo through the hall, a reminder of his centuries of solitude and power. His dark cloak trailed behind him, brushing the walls softly, and his eyes reflected the faint glow of the torches. Alara stole glances at him, trying to read the unreadable expression on his face. Lyra clutched her mother's hand tightly, her small fingers trembling, yet her eyes shone with curiosity rather than fear. The child had sensed that this vampire was not merely a monster. There was something more complex, something hidden behind his cold exterior. They reached a large chamber, its ceilings high and vaulted, filled with the scent of old wood and stone. The walls were lined with tall windows, letting in the silver glow of the moon. Bookshelves reached the ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes, and strange artifacts rested on pedestals, hinting at centuries of collected knowledge. "This will be your room," Kaelric said, his voice calm but distant. "You may stay here while I prepare the remedies for your daughter." Alara nodded, guiding Lyra to a small bed near the window. The child's eyes wandered to the moonlit towers outside, sparkling like jewels in the night. "It's beautiful," Lyra whispered, almost to herself. "Yes," Alara agreed softly, "but it's strange and a little frightening." Kaelric observed them for a moment, his gaze sharp yet unreadable. "Fear is natural," he said, "but it can be controlled. Do not let it rule you." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine, not from the cold but from the intensity of his presence. There was a weight to him, a pull that she could not understand, and it both terrified and fascinated her. He turned and walked toward the large fireplace at the center of the room, where a small flame danced. His movements were smooth and precise, almost hypnotic, as though he had performed them countless times before. Alara watched, trying to understand him, to find some hint of the man beneath the immortal mask. "I will begin the preparation tonight," he said without looking at her. "Lyra's condition is delicate. The curse has roots older than this kingdom. It is tied to power, fear, and a bond stronger than blood." Alara swallowed hard. "Is it dangerous?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Kaelric turned, and for a brief moment the faintest shadow of emotion crossed his face. "Yes," he admitted. "But I have dealt with such darkness before. You must trust me." Trust was a word that felt heavier than gold. Alara had come this far, guided by desperation and hope, but trust, real trust, was something she had almost forgotten, buried beneath years of fear and loss. Yet here she was, standing before a being who could destroy or save them with a single choice, and she knew she had no other option. "I trust you," she said finally, her voice steady despite the fear twisting in her chest. Kaelric studied her for a long moment, his gaze piercing, as though weighing the truth of her words. Then he nodded, almost imperceptibly, and turned back to the fireplace, where the flames flickered and cast dancing shadows across his sharp features. The hours passed quietly. Alara remained by Lyra's side, watching the child sleep fitfully. Outside, the wind howled, carrying distant whispers from the forest beyond the castle walls. Each sound made her jump, each shadow seemed larger than it was. Yet she remained, unwilling to leave her daughter alone, unwilling to let fear control her. Kaelric returned later, carrying a small vial of glowing liquid. His steps were silent on the stone floors, but his presence filled the room as though the air itself recognized him. "This will help her sleep and strengthen her," he said softly. "It is not a cure, but it will give her body a chance to fight the curse." Alara took the vial with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure if gratitude alone could express the depth of her relief. He nodded, his eyes lingering on her face longer than before. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet the weight of that gaze pressed on her heart. She felt as if he could see every fear, every hope, every sorrow she had tried to hide. And in that moment, she realized that the loneliness he carried was like her own, a deep, aching emptiness that no one could fill. Night deepened and the castle grew colder. Alara wrapped a thin blanket around Lyra, holding her close. The child murmured softly in her sleep, and Alara's eyes wandered to Kaelric, who stood by the window, looking out at the moonlit forest. "Do you ever sleep?" she asked quietly, almost afraid to disturb him. He did not turn, but his voice came low, carrying a weight of ages. "Sleep is not necessary for me in the way it is for mortals, but I watch and I remember and I wait. It is enough." Alara studied him, wondering what he remembered, what he had lost, and what had brought him to this life of endless nights. There was a sadness in him, ancient and unspoken, and she felt a strange pull to reach out, to touch the loneliness that mirrored her own. "Have you always been alone?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Kaelric turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment the centuries fell away, and she saw the faint shadow of something human beneath the cold exterior. "Always," he said simply, "and yet tonight perhaps not entirely." The words startled her. She felt a flutter in her chest, a mixture of fear and hope that she could not name. Could it be that even someone as powerful, as immortal as he, could feel the stirrings of connection? Before she could ask more, a soft cry came from Lyra. The child had awakened, her small face pale but alert. Alara rushed to her side, smoothing her hair and whispering reassurances. Kaelric approached quietly, his presence calm and protective. He placed a hand lightly on Lyra's shoulder, and she turned to him with wide eyes. There was no fear in her gaze, only wonder. "Are you helping me?" she asked. "Yes," he replied softly. "I will keep you safe." Alara watched the interaction, her heart swelling with gratitude and an unfamiliar warmth. The fear that had clung to her since the curse had begun seemed to soften, replaced by a cautious hope. Yet she knew this hope was fragile, like a candle flame in a storm. Hours passed, and the three of them remained in the chamber, the castle silent around them. Alara felt her exhaustion pulling at her, but sleep would not come. Her mind wandered to the vampire before her, to the centuries he had lived and the loneliness he bore. She wondered what it meant to touch another soul, to share even a small part of one's own heart with someone else. As the first hints of dawn brushed the horizon with pale light, a sudden noise broke the silence, a shadow moving in the far corner of the room, a whisper carried by the wind that did not belong to the castle. Alara's heart jumped, and Lyra stirred beside her, sensing the tension. Kaelric's posture shifted, his body coiled with alertness, every sense focused on the unseen threat. "They are close," he said quietly, his voice low but filled with an edge of warning. "The ones who seek the child, they will not wait for mercy." Alara's breath caught. "Who are they?" "Dark forces," he said, "tied to the curse that touches her. They hunger for power, for control, and soon they will arrive." Her mind raced, and for the first time she saw the full weight of the night's events. Her daughter's life, the vampire who had saved her, the strange magic that pulsed through the castle, all of it was connected in ways she could barely understand. And in the center of it all stood Kaelric, silent, strong, and unbearably alone. Alara reached out instinctively, brushing a hand against his arm. It was a small gesture, but it held more meaning than words could express. For a moment, the centuries of loneliness he carried seemed to soften, as if her touch reminded him of something he had long thought lost. I trust you," she said again, her voice firm despite the tremor of fear. Kaelric's gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. "Then you will survive," he said. "And so will she, but trust alone is not enough. You must be ready to face the night in all its darkness and truth." Alara nodded, gripping Lyra's hand tightly. She did not fully understand what lay ahead, but she knew that she would face it. And somehow she knew that Kaelric would face it too, not as the distant, silent vampire of legend, but as someone who had begun to care, to feel, and to hope. And in the shadows, beyond the reach of candlelight, the night waited. It was patient, it was hungry, and it would not release its secrets easily. The story was far from over. The castle was quiet, yet heavy with an unseen presence. The air hung thick, almost vibrating with tension, as if the walls themselves knew the danger approaching. Outside, the winter wind rattled the towers and swept through the forests, carrying with it the scent of something ancient, something dark. Lyra's condition had worsened. The faint color that had returned to her cheeks in Kaelric's care had begun to fade again, leaving her pale as snow. Her breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible, and her small hands trembled in her mother's grasp. Alara refused to leave her side, her heart heavy with fear and guilt. "She is fading," Alara whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, you must help her." Kaelric knelt beside the bed, his dark eyes fixed on the child. For the first time, his usual calm was shaken by something he could not control. Centuries of experience, countless encounters with dark forces, had prepared him for almost everything, but not for the helplessness he felt in front of this child. "The curse is stronger than I first anticipated," he admitted, his voice low. "It is older than this kingdom, older than your family. It binds life to shadows, twisting it until hope almost disappears." Alara's hands clenched around Lyra's. "Then we have no time to waste. Please tell me what I must do." Kaelric's gaze shifted to her, and for the first time the distance between them felt almost tangible. He had seen her courage, her desperation, and even a hint of something softer, a strength born from love and loss. Yet he also saw fear, fragile and consuming, and he knew he could not afford mistakes. "You must remain calm," he said. "The child senses emotions. Any fear or doubt will strengthen the curse. I will perform a ritual, but it is dangerous. If I fail, the outcome will be worse than before." Alara swallowed, nodding. "Do it. I trust you." Kaelric rose and moved to the center of the room. He drew a circle on the floor with chalk-like powder that shimmered faintly under the moonlight. Candles were arranged around the edges, each flame steady despite the cold drafts that swept through the castle. He opened an ancient book, its pages filled with symbols that seemed to writhe as he traced them with his fingers. Alara watched, her eyes wide, as Kaelric began to chant softly. His voice was smooth, melodic, almost hypnotic, and it seemed to pull at the shadows themselves. The walls of the chamber grew darker, yet the light of the candles did not falter. Lyra stirred slightly, sensing the change, her small hand clutching her mother's tightly. What is happening?" Alara whispered. "The curse binds her to forces older than the living," Kaelric explained, his voice calm yet intense. "I am trying to untangle it, to free her without harming her." The ritual continued for hours, the air growing colder and heavier. Alara could see frost forming on the edges of the windows, yet the circle in the center glowed with a warm, silver light. She dared not move, fearing that even the slightest action could disrupt the delicate balance Kaelric maintained. As the ritual progressed, Kaelric's eyes darkened with memory. He began to speak, not to Alara or Lyra but to the shadows themselves, recounting a story of betrayal and loss that stretched back centuries. "Long ago," he whispered, "I loved someone I could not protect. I failed, and the price was my own heart. I swore never to trust again, never to love again. Yet here I am, standing in the presence of life that matters more than my own eternity." Alara felt a pang in her chest. This was not the fearsome monster of legends. This was a being who had endured grief and regret, whose loneliness had become a cage. And somehow, through the cold and darkness, he had chosen to protect her daughter. Lyra stirred again, her eyes fluttering open. It's warm," she murmured. "I feel safe." Alara's throat tightened. "You are safe," she said softly. "Kaelric is helping you." The vampire's gaze met hers, a faint shadow of vulnerability crossing his features. "Do not mistake my actions for sentiment," he said quietly. "I act because it is necessary, not because I wish to be bound by affection. Yet, there is truth in these moments, and it is unavoidable." Alara nodded, unsure of how to respond. She could see the struggle within him, the pull between centuries of loneliness and the stirrings of a heart long thought lost. She did not dare speak further, knowing that words could not capture the weight of what was happening. Suddenly, a tremor shook the chamber. The candle flames flickered wildly, and the circle on the floor pulsed with silver light. Shadows twisted violently along the walls, as if the darkness itself were alive and resisting Kaelric's efforts. "The curse is fighting," Kaelric said sharply, his voice rising with urgency. "It does not wish to release her." Alara clutched Lyra closer, her heart pounding. "Then fight it, please fight it." Kaelric's hands moved faster, tracing intricate symbols in the air. His voice grew louder, resonating with a strange, otherworldly power. The shadows writhed and twisted, forming shapes that almost seemed human, faces and hands reaching out, trying to pull the child into the darkness. Lyra gasped, but Kaelric's hand moved to her shoulder, steadying her. "Do not be afraid, little one," he whispered. "I am here. You will not fall into the night." Alara's eyes welled with tears as she watched him, a being she barely understood, pour himself into the ritual with a strength and intensity that surpassed human limits. There was danger, yes, but also a beauty in the way he moved, a rhythm and grace that felt almost sacred. Time seemed to stretch, the minutes and hours blending into an endless night. Alara feared the ritual would fail, feared the shadows would claim her daughter, feared that all their hope would vanish in the cold darkness. Yet Kaelric did not waver. Finally, the light in the circle flared, bright and blinding. The shadows screamed, twisting one last time before collapsing into nothingness. The air grew still, the temperature returning to normal. Lyra's breathing deepened, her small body relaxing for the first time in days. "It worked," Alara whispered, barely daring to believe it. "Yes," Kaelric said quietly, his eyes still focused on the fading glow of the circle. "She is freed from the immediate grasp of the curse, but it is not gone entirely. Its roots remain, hidden and patient. It will test her again and us in ways we cannot yet predict." Alara nodded, her hands trembling as she held her daughter. Relief washed over her, mingled with fear for what was yet to come. She glanced at Kaelric, noticing for the first time the exhaustion etched into his features. He had given himself entirely to the ritual, revealing not just his power, but also the depth of his own emotion. "Thank you," she said softly, though she knew words could never express the weight of her gratitude. Kaelric looked at her, his gaze lingering, and for a moment the centuries of distance between them seemed to fall away. "Do not thank me yet," he said quietly. "There is more to come. The darkness does not yield easily, and our choices are not yet complete." Alara's heart tightened. She understood now that this was only the beginning. The curse had been partially undone, but its shadow lingered, and the forces that sought to control Lyra were still out there, waiting. Suddenly, a soft rustle echoed from the corridor outside. Alara froze, her breath catching in her throat. Kaelric moved instantly, placing himself between her and Lyra and the unseen threat. His eyes, dark and sharp, scanned the shadows. "They are near," he said quietly, almost to himself. "And soon, you will see why the child's life drew me from the silence of centuries." Alara's hand found his arm instinctively, seeking reassurance. She felt the pulse of power beneath his skin, the strength that had saved her daughter, and a flicker of hope grew in her heart. Yet she also sensed the danger still lingering in the air, a warning that their struggle was far from over. The night outside seemed to listen, holding its breath, as if the world itself awaited the next move. And in the heart of the castle, 3 lives were bound together, by love, by desperation, and by forces older and darker than any of them had ever faced. Alara looked at Kaelric, at the man who had saved her daughter, and revealed a glimpse of the heart beneath his immortality. And she understood that the coming trials would not only test their courage, but also their hearts. And as the first hints of dawn brushed the towers with pale light, a shadow moved beyond the window, a figure watching, waiting, and patient. The true darkness had arrived. The wind howled over the cliffs above the ocean, carrying with it the scent of salt and storm. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the jagged rocks below, and thunder rolled like the voice of the world itself. The castle, once a haven, now felt like the eye of an approaching storm. Kaelric stood at the edge of the main hall, his dark cloak whipping around him. His eyes, sharp and focused, scanned the horizon. Outside, figures emerged from the shadows, creatures of darkness, bound to the curse that had long haunted Lyra. Their purpose was clear: to take what the child represented to feed on her life and power. Alara held Lyra close, the child trembling but alive. The night had tested them, pushed them to the edge, and now the final moment had arrived. Fear gnawed at Alara's heart, yet beneath it all burned a fragile courage, a courage drawn from love, from hope, and from the realization that they could not run any longer. "They are here," Kaelric said quietly, his voice carrying both warning and command. "I cannot promise that this will be easy, but I can promise that I will not let them take her." Alara nodded, gripping Lyra's hand. "We will face them together," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Kaelric's gaze softened slightly, a fleeting shadow of emotion that few had ever seen. He had carried centuries of loneliness, had believed himself incapable of connection or redemption, and yet here he was, standing with mortals who trusted him, who needed him, who had touched a part of him long thought lost. The first of the dark figures stepped into the hall, their forms twisting and shadowed, eyes glowing with hunger and malice. They moved with unnatural speed, yet Kaelric met them without fear. His presence was commanding, his power undeniable as he raised his hand. A wave of silver light shot forth, holding them at bay. Alara felt the pull of panic, yet she did not retreat. Lyra's small hand squeezed hers, and she felt the child's trust, her innocence, and her quiet courage. It was a reminder that courage came in many forms, not just in power but in love, in protection, and in unwavering faith. Kaelric's voice rang out, strong and clear. "Begone! You shall not touch this child." The figures recoiled, yet their advance did not stop. They surged forward, shadows writhing, and the hall seemed to shrink around them. Kaelric moved with precision, his hands tracing symbols in the air, summoning power that pulsed like the heartbeat of the night itself. Alara stayed close to Lyra, whispering encouragement to the child. "You are safe, you are strong, and we are here with you." The battle was swift, yet the tension never eased. The dark figures were relentless, but Kaelric's strength, honed through centuries, was unmatched. Light clashed with shadow, and the hall seemed to tremble under the force of their struggle. Through the chaos, Kaelric's eyes met Alara's. In that glance, she saw not just power, but a vulnerability that mirrored her own. He was fighting not for pride, not for vengeance, but for something that had been missing for centuries: a chance at redemption, a chance to care, to protect, to love. As the final figure fell back, defeated, a silence swept over the hall. The air was heavy with the aftermath of battle, yet the danger was not gone entirely. The curse had been challenged, but it lingered, waiting for weakness, waiting for fear. Kaelric turned to Alara, his expression softer now, touched by something human. "It is over for now," he said, "but the night watches always, and the curse is patient. We must remain vigilant." Alara approached him, her heart pounding. "You saved her. You saved us both," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to thank you." "You do not need to," he replied. "Your trust, your courage, your presence, that is enough, more than enough." For a moment they simply stood there, the storm outside echoing the turbulence within. Lyra, sensing the calm, reached out to Kaelric with a small, trusting hand. He hesitated only for a heartbeat before taking it gently in his own, the warmth of his touch bridging the centuries of distance that had kept him isolated. "You are safe now, little one," he said, his voice low and comforting. Lyra smiled faintly, and for the first time in days, the tension in her small body seemed to ease completely. Alara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the vampire lord of legend, but a being capable of change, capable of emotion, and capable of redemption. "You are not alone," she whispered, her words carrying more weight than she could measure. "Not anymore." For a moment, Kaelric did not respond. Then slowly he nodded, the hint of a smile brushing his features. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it held the promise of something new, a connection he had long thought impossible, a hope that he could step out of the shadows of his own past. As dawn began to light the horizon, painting the storm clouds in pale gold, Kaelric and Alara stood together, with Lyra between them. The world outside was still vast and dangerous, still filled with shadows and storms, but for this brief moment they were united, bound not just by circumstance but by choice, by trust, and by the fragile beginnings of love. Alara let out a sigh of relief, her hand brushing against Kaelric's. We survived," she said. "Yes," he replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon, "and we will continue to survive, together." The castle was quiet now, the echoes of the night's battle fading into memory. Yet the air still shimmered with the remnants of magic, a reminder that the world was full of wonder, danger, and possibility. The darkness that had haunted them had been challenged, but it remained, waiting patiently for the next test. Lyra yawned, leaning against her mother. I feel happy," she murmured, a small smile on her lips. "Safe." Alara kissed her forehead. "Yes, my love, you are safe, and we are together." Kaelric watched them, a strange warmth rising within him. For centuries, he had believed that immortality meant isolation, that power required detachment. But now, standing there with two lives intertwined with his own, he felt something he had long thought impossible, a sense of belonging. The wind continued to blow, carrying with it the salt and promise of the ocean below. Lightning flashed once more, illuminating the trio against the cliffside backdrop, and Kaelric felt a resolve harden within him. The past could not be undone, but the future could be shaped. He would protect them, guide them, and perhaps allow himself to be changed by them in return. Alara glanced at him, sensing the shift. "Kaelric," she said softly, we are not the same as before, and neither are you." He nodded, a small smile brushing his lips. "No," he agreed, "we are not, and that is enough." The first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering the darkness and painting the world in gold and silver. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered, a reminder of the trials they had faced and the strength they had found in one another. Alara held Lyra close and looked at Kaelric. "Whatever comes next," she said, "we will face it together." He met her gaze, and for the first time the centuries of solitude seemed to melt away. "Together," he agreed, and as the wind whispered across the cliffs and the castle stood strong against the sea, a sense of peace settled over them. The curse had tested them, the darkness had challenged them, and yet they had endured. Not just survived, but begun to heal, to hope, and to forge a connection that even time itself could not break. The night had been long, the shadows deep, but the dawn had come. And with it, a promise that love, trust, and courage could illuminate even the darkest paths. The story had reached a moment of stillness, but the world remained full of unknowns. Together they would face whatever came next, bound by choice, by courage, and by the quiet, enduring power of connection. The lonely vampire was no longer entirely alone, and in that truth, the darkness itself seemed a little less frightening.